welcome to this week's Power Up podcast. What if the secret to living a longer, healthier and happier life wasn't locked in the latest health trend, but in centuries-old habits and the world's longest living communities? In this episode, we're going to dive into the fascinating world of blue zones, the 5 regions where people routinely live past 100, not by chasing health trends, but by living with clarity, simplicity, and purpose. We'll uncover how a deep sense of meaning, a natural approach to movement, and the joy of connection, and yes, maybe the odd little swig of red wine, all contribute to living longevity and vitality. But this isn't just about adding years to your life. More importantly, it's about living better with more joy, purpose, and connection. So Lisa has been doing a lot of research on this, and it's something she's very passionate about. So I'm going to be asking a lot of the questions here, and having you read the book about blue zones, and you've been delving into this quite a bit. I know it's something it's close to your heart. So in this episode, Lisa, what are we actually going to cover?
I think the first thing that we'll explore is what blue zones are, what characterizes a blue zone and where they are in the world. We'll look at the 4 key common denominators of those blue zones around the world, why purpose is a very powerful foundation for longevity and for life and leadership, what blue zones teach us about movement, mindful eating and connection with other people. And then we'll look at some practical takeaways for leaders so that listeners of this podcast can actually incorporate some of these principles in the work that they do with their teams. It's a totally fascinating subject. There's a fantastic book about the subject, which I'll share in a bit, and also various different YouTube videos, and there's actually a Netflix series as well. So it's totally fascinating and something that I've been researching for the last couple of years, really. So I'm very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, a question on my mind is that if I was listening to this, I know what I'm like when I'm listening to podcasts, I'm deciding whether or not I'm going to invest time in listening to the entire episode.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm not 70 years old, looking to try and get another 30 or 40 years out of my life. Why would I want to listen to this if I was of much younger age? What relevance would it be to me? Now, I think I know the answer to the question, but why would someone want to invest time listening to this episode about blue zones?
I think that there's much more awareness and much more interest around health and wellness, and it's a multi-billion-pound industry. People are spending millions and millions of pounds every year on the latest diet trend and gym membership and supplements and all of that sort of thing. But the answer, so there is definitely an interest in it. The answer is actually a lot more simple and a lot cheaper, actually, than media, popular media would have us believe.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, certainly, I've got 2 teenage girls. They're interested in it now, and they're only 17 and 18 years old. So I do believe that it's appropriate at any age. And actually, the foundations, the earlier you start, the more chance that you have.
Absolutely. And to me, I've always believed in this concept of modeling and modeling excellence. If you want to learn about something, or you want to get great at something, go and find out who is already doing it.
Yeah. And
the facts are very clear to see. If these people are living longer statistically than their counterparts, there's got to be something about those people. So let's get into this and learn more about it and how we can apply it to our lives now. And I'm with you on this. It is a very, very fascinating subject. So let's talk first of all, what are the blue zones?
The blue zones are, the research originally was done by a guy called Dan Bayutna. This is the book, Blue Zones of Happiness. And he's a National Geographic explorer who become fascinated with why the people that live the longest, why they live the longest, and what are some of the rituals that they incorporate in their lives. And he identified 5 areas around the world where this phenomenon was prevalent, and they are in Japan, Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, Nicoya in Costa Rica, Icaria in Greece, and Loma Linda, which was a surprising one, in California.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think you said to me that the genetics only account for about 20% of this longevity. Is that right?
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, you've still got to win the genetic lottery,
Yeah. Yeah.
of some sort of illness. You've still got to win the genetic lottery. But what the research found was that 80% of what contributed to longevity in these particular areas was down to their environment.
Lifestyle. Yeah.
20% was down to their genetics.
Okay.
And so, he was also saying, 10 of that 10% of that 80%, 10% could be down to the healthcare system, but that still leaves a massive 70% that we can affect in terms of how we set up the environment that we live in, and some of the rituals that we get involved in on a day-to-day basis.
So at a high level then, are there any specific features that relate to each of these 5 regions in terms of what they're doing?
Yeah, so he identified 4 common denominators that were present in all of these areas, and we can explore each of them in turn.
Right.
The first was the right outlook in terms of, how people view life and how they approach life, and incorporates a sense of purpose, which was prevalent in all those 5 areas. That they move naturally, so they don't spend necessarily thousands of pounds on gym memberships and the latest health trend. They actually incorporate movement in their day-to-day lives. They eat wisely and mindfully, and massive is the power of connection with other people and the relationships that they have around them in their environment.
Wow.
Yeah.
Simple, doable, effective things that don't cost a fortune to do. And what's the upshot of this? What can we look forward to in terms of, how much longer do they actually live?
The research that Dan did, people in the blue zones actually live 8 to 10 years longer. But it's the quality of those years as well. Yeah. So they have lower risk of dementia, heart disease, and diabetes, and other chronic illnesses as well. So it's not just the longevity, it's the quality of those years.
I mean, I personally would put that almost above, because if the last sort of 15, 20 years of your life are a struggle, can't stand up, can't walk, can't operate, can't bend over, can't do anything, versus actually you're living relative to your age, you're still living a mobile, happy, peaceful, cognizant life, intelligent, cognitive thinking, I meant to say, is still there.
Yeah.
That's what we call this health span versus lifespan. I think it's a really important thing.
And I always think, I've got parents that are 89 and 90 this years old, so I've got evidence of that in front of me day to day. And thankfully, I've still got my parents at that age, which is amazing. But the quality of their life is being impacted now by, maybe some of the behaviours from earlier on in their life. Totally still cognizant and all the rest of it, but starting to get limited mobility. And so that is why I was particularly fascinated about this as well. And I always think it's quite cruel that the final chapter of your life is a demise rather than final flourish and having, the best time, and then popping off with a massive smile on your face, which obviously happens for some people. But I think some of these principles give us the best opportunity to make that reality, genetics.
All right, well, let's start with the first one, the right outlook and purpose. Let's start there, which we both know a fair bit about, because there's something that we actually have done a lot with this podcast, and really was at the kind of heart of why we started it in the first place, living purposeful, happy lives. So let's start there.
And I think that in a nutshell, people in the blue zones, the research found that they knew why they were waking up in the morning. They had a sense of purpose in terms of their contribution they make in their community, in their work,
Yeah.
in their lives.
And that can be that could be whether or not that is, running a business or tending to your community garden or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
At the heart of it, there is, when they get up in the morning, there's a reason for getting up in the morning and they feel good about it.
Yeah. And in Japan, I mean, we've shared this
Ikigai.
Previously before, in Japan, it's known as Ikigai. And in Costa Rica, it's Plan de Vida. They have that strong sense of purpose. And like you say, no matter what their contribution is to life, they've got a sense of what that is.
And I think just to reiterate that point, because this, anything that gets overused, and we do hear a lot more about what is your purpose and knowing your purpose, it can get overlooked when you hear it too much. And really, it is a feeling. It is a feeling. That's what it is. It's a feeling. And anything that is a feeling is going to affect your neurology. You're going to feel more relaxed. You're going to induce more of your parasympathetic nervous system. You're going to be less stressed, better hormones. So I think that really has to be joy and meaning. I think Ikigai centers around, and that's a pretty strong thing to get up every day. I mean, if you bumped into 100 people on the street and said, first thing in the morning, you're looking forward to your day, I wonder how many people really, truly in their work and over the course of every day would say, I'm really looking forward to today. And
I think a lot of people start with what they've got to get done without actually thinking about why and the impact that has. And that can lead to, you're just sort of unconsciously going through day to day, doing without actually getting the benefit of the contribution that you were making. It may well be there, but it's not, you've not actually.
Absolutely. I was thinking the same.
Yeah.
That it's not a question of actually doing something different.
No.
It's actually realizing that you are making a contribution, no matter what role you're in. It doesn't have to be financially motivated. I look at people around me as I go traveling around the world and I'm doing these various different tasks. And I look at them and I think it's a fairly sort of noble, humble role you're doing. Thank God you're doing that.
Yeah.
Someone is doing it and it is making a difference. So
the cleaners on the bullet trains in Japan, it's not what they're doing, it's how they view what they're doing. And their purpose is to make it a clean and pleasurable experience on the bullet train. If they focus on the task, it's one thing, but focusing on the impact that task is having is something completely different. It's a bit like the story that we tell on our programs around the stonemason versus the cathedral builder. Stonemason's very focused on what he's doing stone without looking up, and actually, it's a very different feeling when you can see the beautiful cathedral that you're
building a cathedral.
Yeah,
which will last many years, and people will come and meet together there for hundreds of years on from that point. Yeah. And I think would it be fair to say that we do go through different chapters in our life, and there's something that we took from the book Life Launch, which I really like, don't they? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think that there are, various transitions where something ends and something else emerges, and a sense of purpose helps you ride those transitions and helps you think about what you want the next chapter of your life to be. If you focus on, thinking about what you want that to look and feel like in terms of the impact that you have. And also it helps you not do things that you think you should do because maybe others your age or at your stage of life or in your role are doing, but really think about what you want. Want to versus ought to. This
is a big thing. I know a lot of the coaching I can get involved with where people are in career transition or they are moving towards perhaps more senior roles. And I think some of the work that I do is around people transitioning to the C-suite. And these are big, big life decisions. And I'm meeting people all the time and I say to them, is this a role you really want? And this debate between want to do it, do I want to do it? I feel like someone's putting me up for this role. I think everyone around me is expecting me to do it. And it feels like I ought to be doing it because it's the next natural step. But do I really want to do it? And the challenge comes when somebody doesn't acknowledge that the two aren't necessarily the same.
Yes.
And when you take a role that you feel you ought to do because the environment, your boss, your friends, your business acquaintances, everyone's expecting you to do that next step, but it doesn't feel completely congruent.
Yeah.
And then we end up in a role, we're not really, it's not giving us suddenly our life is completely taken over by our job.
Yeah.
Or our career move, and it's no longer allowing you to serve the other parts of your life.
And then you've got that jarring and that constant feeling of, I'm now on this path, and once you're on it, it's very difficult. It's
very sometimes. Yeah, I actually often say to people, I just feel a bit trapped, a bit stuck where I set myself up in this situation, and now I can't really, finding it very difficult to reverse out of it.
Yeah, and I think that is also, talking about how this is relevant across the age spectrums. I've got the exact same thing with my daughter Daisy at the moment. The ought to is go to university, but she knows she doesn't actually. She knows that she would have a great time. Don't get me wrong, partying, but that she really wants to study, and so we are trying to support in exploring where her passions are and start from that and in terms of other opportunities. So it's not just as you get older, it can it needs to actually
absolutely
at the very beginning of your career.
I think a very quick and simple way of thinking about this as you make these decisions is to really think about, what's really important to you in terms of your, what we like to describe as your motivating values, not just your life values, but what is it, where is your source of joy coming from? What sort of things do you really enjoy doing? What activities? And what is if you can then pinpoint the thing that you're valuing, it could be variety, it could be a sense of contribution, it could be creativity, it could be working with other people, teaming. It could be, you could be very driven by achievement, but really know what those things are for you personally, and then looking to that role and say, is that going to give me that? How much of my day am I going to be able to experience those values? Yeah. Because if anyone is unhappy, this is a very, very quick way of uncovering probably why they're not happy, because they're not able to experience those things that they value consistently every day.
Yeah, I mean, even personally, over the last few years, I mean, obviously I love what we do in terms of the content and helping people, but I've really over the last few years realized just how much I love being creative and the whole creative side of things. And by doing some of this work on myself, I've personally had the opportunity to actually think, there's loads of opportunity for me to be creative in our work, particularly as we've done more of the digital side of things, and creating beautiful products that make a difference to people's lives is the opportunity that I'm thankful that but it was always there. I'm now viewing it differently, which creates a much more fulfilling sense of purpose.
Absolutely, Okay, so shift from living by default to living by design, essentially, is probably a good way of describing that. Intentional, deciding what you want, and actually perhaps being a little bit selfish about it. I mean, really, ultimately, if you look after yourself and you do something you really want to do, you are going to be happier, and everyone else around you is going to be happier. You'll do a better job of it. You'll add more value to other people. So let's not concern ourselves with putting ourselves as a priority here and doing what we really want to do.
Absolutely. And, the evidence suggests that people that have a strong sense of purpose are 2.4 times less likely to suffer from things like Alzheimer's. So there's, a definite upside to taking time to research that and think about that for yourselves personally. And I think with this particular pillar of the blue zones and having the right outlook also comes something that they call downshift. And this is whilst they recognize that all lives come with periods of stress, that they also recognize the opportunity to downshift and shed some of that stress at the end of the day. So in the blue zones, they incorporate rituals to actually slow life down a little bit. So whilst they might have been busy in the day, for example, in Japan, they have a time of reflection at the end of the day, remembering their ancestors. In Sardinia, which sounds brilliant to me, it's about having a happy hour with friends. So, everything at the end of the day, but mindfully, maybe sharing a glass of wine. In Icaria in Greece, they incorporate naps, as they do in Spain, naps in the middle of and relaxation. In Loma Linda, which is a heavy religious area, they incorporate the Sabbath, at the end of the week, where they're connecting and sharing with friends.
I mean, when you do get the chance to do that, if anyone listening to this, if you can, I think it's important for people to sort of recognize when you do that, it feels great. And there is a sort of time slot, isn't there, between sort of the closing of the day, 6-ish, say, and 8 or 9 in the evening. In that gap, when you're still relatively fresh, you sort of transition out of your day, whether you're meeting a friend, playing a sport, having some, catching up with somebody. It does feel very relaxing.
It really does.
When you do it properly.
Yeah. Easy. There's always something that needs doing, especially if you've got a house, family, or whatever. There's always something that you could be doing. But that period where you're just focusing on yourself and slowing things down, for me, as you know, it's walking up, in the hills. And at the moment, it's light until 8:30 at night. We've got plenty of opportunity to do that. Yeah. But you recognize the benefits. You sleep better because you're not thinking and worrying over all of the things, and you wake up more restful and ready to go again, the next day. So I think it's really important.
I'll tell you what, an image I always get in my head as you're speaking there is, some parts of Spain where I see these old boys who get together late in the afternoon for a game of dominoes.
Yeah, or chess,
And then with chess, and they're sitting around and laughing, and you can see that they just do it every day. It is just a nice release. I've got to look at that and think kind of envious of that. Would I give myself the joy of having that downtime and living in a very Western business orientated life? We just don't give ourselves that gift.
To bring yourself to the present moment as well.
You can see how if you don't have that downshift, as you call it, that downshift, then you're taking the stress of this day and it's building into the next and the next and the next. Having that little bit of release, slow down to go faster. So clarify your purpose, build daily pauses into your routine, daily rituals to slow down, shed stress, encourage your team to connect to their why. These are some of the things you can do as a leader. Spend time with your team, run a session. I think it's very powerful. Both know we've shared this little book, Ikigai, with people, which is something we would recommend. We'll put it in the show notes. But just having a session with your own team and asking them to connect to their own purpose. Some organizations that we work with do this really well. Some of the professional services firms we work with definitely do this in their own kind of workshop. So doing this with your own team and asking your team to think about what is their own personal why, very powerful.
Because I think a lot of teams actually focus on the purpose of the organization or of the team, but it's really important to take that to the level of team member and help them identify that. So, yeah.
So, second point, one of these common denominators is about moving naturally.
Yeah. So this one's really about no gym's just life. So it's not about a gym membership and saying, I am now going for an hour's exercise. People in blue zones actually incorporate into their daily lives. So it is about creating the environment that nudges you towards movement naturally every day. So rather than getting the bus or driving to meet friends, they would take the opportunity to walk. It might be that they are gardening, or their jobs actually involve movement every day. So it's all about the environment, because at the end of the day, and I'm sure that everybody listening to this has experienced it, the discipline muscle wears off after time. So if your environment is set up in a way that nudges you towards movement every day naturally as part of your day, then that's the sort of ritual that increases longevity. So walking meetings or calls, taking the stairs instead of taking the lift, even dancing in your garden, doing gardening, playing with your children, incorporating as much as you can to move naturally, every day, taking a lovely, long walk, even 20 minutes of walking can have very positive effects. And actually, walking at least 7,000 steps a day reduces the risk of premature death by 50%. So, that's a pretty stark fact. Just 7,000, not even the 10,000, 7,000 steps a day, 50%.
Our friend Colin gave me a book around Built to Move. They start off by saying that, we were built, for example, not necessarily to sit on chairs with support. We used to sit on our haunches, and therefore we used to bend our legs down.
Yes.
And if we stop doing that, then naturally they become stiffer and stiffer.
Yeah.
And life, cars, transport, whatever, everything is around comfort and keeping us cozy and safe.
And rather than supporting ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know the exact stats, but I'm seeing loads on social media at the moment about the importance of balance and, strength training and strengthening of muscle groups so that you can support yourself. Even my father, okay, he's 90 years old, so his muscles have been working for a long time, but, it's very difficult. If he falls over, it is very difficult for him to get up unaided, which has other impacts.
Yeah, I read something about that there's more injuries or more causes of critical conditions, fatalities, down to people falling, rather than other forms of disease, because you can't keep yourself stable.
Yeah.
So I'm very focused on keeping my legs strong at
your arms so that you can pull yourself up.
Yeah.
You can do those sorts of things naturally as well. It doesn't have to necessarily be going to the gym. It can be work that you do around your house, or that sort of thing. That's the sort of message: is make your environment as conducive as possible to walking. The other day, I needed to go to Guildford for a couple of things, and I thought I'm actually going to get the train. So I didn't take the car, I got the train, and then I walked back from Guildford, which was absolutely beautiful because it was such a sunny day. I did actually get lost in the hills that I've walked in for a very long time, but it was just a lovely, mindful thing to do. But I forced myself almost to do it by creating the environment where I didn't have the car, But in terms of what leaders can do, in their teams to support this is to promote, walking meetings. Not everyone sat down at your desk. You can go out for walking meetings. Workspaces, can be designed. We're sort of conditioned to think you go into a room and you sit down in a chair. It doesn't have to be like that. It can be set up in a way that promotes, stand up communal spaces. And I think promoting regular breaks, particularly when people are working from home, try to do something where, if you're not physically meeting, two people can have, or few people can have a walking meeting in different locations with the technology that we now have available.
I think the regular bakes thing, I feel very strongly about that sort of punching through the day, one meeting after another, having this 5-minute physiological break where you actually stand up, move around, go and get something, glass of water or whatever, makes a big, big difference to your energy. And, we know we get these little reminders with our Aura rings or whatever device you use to move. And there is a reason for that.
Yeah, don't ignore it.
It's shown that if you move, you'll have more energy. You're bringing more oxygen into your brain. You'll feel better, and you're just building these very small movements. I remember I had a bit of a period of time where I had an issue with my neck, and I really got into stretching. And I actually found that, when I started researching, I realized how many things you can actually do at your desk or just standing up.
Yes.
Or, like in that book, Built to Move, there's lots of exercises. And if you're standing in a queue, stand on one leg for a little bit, on the other leg.
When brushing your teeth.
Or brushing your teeth, or on the tube, or whatever it is, on the underground, whatever. There's so many little things you can do that are just built into your day.
And there's lots of, like standing desks. This one raises up. So at some points in the day, I can just stand and, it's better if you have a complete break away from it, because then you're not getting the sort of mental break away. But there's lots of things that you can do to set up your environment to move.
So move your ass is what we're saying, right? Don't be sedentary. Don't be sitting still all day, doing nothing. Get up and move. Okay, now eating.
Yes.
Wisely.
Yeah. So this is the third pillar that they found from the research in the blue zone. So eating wisely, mindfully, whatever you want to call it. And some practical tips. So, I think the first thing is that the research found that it was a plant slant. So not, no meat, completely vegetarian, but incorporating more grains and vegetables and naturally grown foods into your diet. Meals in the blue zones tend to be a savoured ritual rather than a means to an end. So quite often they're shared with friends, but they are, slow and mindful in their approach, not a snack that's eaten at your desk or train or something like that. And my particular favourite, that the research found that red wine in moderation is also conducive to longevity. So red wine, but maybe not in moderation. Maybe I need to work on a bit of that. But I think some practical tips. So they have the 80% rule. So stop when you're 80% full. And actually the Japanese have a prayer that is along those lines that they say at the beginning of their meal to remind themselves. I'll actually find it and put it in notes, but they say it like a prayer, because it takes at least 20 minutes from the signal from your stomach to your brain to recognize that you're actually full. So if you stop at 2%, you obviously consume less calories, but you will, most likely.
Isn't that so true? When you overeat, you really do go into that food coma and you feel really sluggish. That's not meant to happen. But that feeling you get when you've eaten food, but actually, you still feel energetic.
Yes. Actually, you feel nourished. That's what you're aiming for, isn't it? And I think that one way of doing that as well, I think I've mentioned this before, but we've got into this sort of habit in my family where we put the food out on the table, and then that's not good. Pre-plating food is much better for more eating than having the smorgasbord of stuff in front of you. You
don't realise how much you've actually eaten.
Yeah, exactly. So pre-plating food is another practical tip. Even when you're doing the shopping, if you're looking at the labels in foods, the less ingredients, the better generally it is for you. The longer list of ingredients tends to be processed
I always use this, if you look at some food and you can't identify where it's come from,
Yeah.
if it's come out of the ground,
Yeah.
it's grown on a tree or a bush, you're going to be reasonably good. But if you can't actually recognize it, you don't know what it is, then it's probably been overly processed beyond recognition. You know that on the way, the whole lot of other stuff is going to be added to it, so it's not going to be quite as good for you.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good premise.
And I think that, we talked about environment in terms of movement, but environment is obviously important in any habit that we want to build. And modern environments, generally, media, and all the rest of it, pushes towards unhealthy choices. You don't see many adverts on TV for the latest and vegetables and that sort of thing. It's all about very heavily processed foods, and there's sort of it's almost glamorized, isn't it?
Yeah.
Unhealthy foods. And the sad thing is that is starting to infiltrate into the blue zones as well. And I watched a YouTube video that Dan was talking about this, and he was saying, actually, if it carries on in 10 years' time, there may not be any blue zones around the world, because even the blue zones are being infiltrated by this American food culture. So, it's going to take conscious choice to refrain from that for even the blue zones to survive.
And then the wine thing, I do think that people who have a glass of wine, every day, rather than thinking, right, I'm saving myself up for the weekend. That feeling you get when you have a nice glass of wine, it's actually very nice. When you have 2 bottles of wine, you shared a couple of bottles of wine, that's a very different feeling.
Yeah.
And not so great for you, but it's that feeling, I really need a drink, because you haven't had a drink for a long time, it's not as healthy for you at all. So
can't save them up. It is about moderate, regular, rather than 20 at the weekend. If you do overindulge, and I definitely have done that. Done that. Together sometimes, but the next day you cannot do all of these other things that we're talking about.
No, it's a knock-on effect. Exactly. Yeah. You don't. If you make poor choices one day, it has a knock-on effect to the choices you'll make the next day, and so forth and so forth, because you don't feel like doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So rather than the weekend being a place for rest and digest, if you overindulge, your body's having to work doubly hard to try and deal with all the toxins you put into it.
You arrive on Monday morning. So rubbish, don't you? Mindful eating,
better choices.
And all the rest.
It's getting because we, in the moment, we think we're going to get more of a rush from doing all the wrong stuff. It's delaying that gratification. And try doing something different over the course of the weekend, and realizing how much more energy you'll have, how much better you'll feel, and the better the choices you'll make. You'll feel like getting up on a Sunday morning and going for a walk.
Absolutely.
You will feel like doing these other things, and so therefore you'll get your buzz, your hit from the holistic feeling of the entire weekend, rather than a 2-hour, 3-hour window of going crazy.
And the way I sort of think about it as well, I mean, I have been sort of consciously trying to think more mindfully about what I'm eating, and I am seeing positive results. But I think a bit about, is this a deposit or a withdrawal in terms of my overall, what I'm trying to achieve, and sometimes you might make a withdrawal, and that's all right, in moderation, as long as it's not all withdrawals. And no deposits. That's how I think.
Yeah. Are you satisfying your mind and your emotional state in the short term? But what is it actually doing for your body?
Yeah.
What does your body want?
Yeah.
What your body wants.
Yes.
It's rested. It needs good, healthy food for all the systems to work. Digestive system, cardiovascular. That's actually what it wants. And if we treat it right, we'll get that dividend paid back to us. Not just today, but the day after that, and so forth. In these blue zones, because it's just like a daily ritual. It's not an effort. they don't feel like they're having to give up anything.
No.
I think in the Western world, we feel like we're having to give something up. So it makes it harder rather than it just being, that's the way I live my life. And that's the big difference here. Perhaps they don't have the lure of these other things around them, the stimulus, the instant gratification and the stimulus from these other things we're talking about here, rather than just making a daily choice to go for that walk, to eat better food, to eat with your friends, to make the connection, to slow down a bit.
Slightly harder in our environment where we are bombarded, but we still have choice and we still can make these.
Exercise that choice, that's right. And do it for a while and see and feel the difference. It really does. You will feel better for it, for sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. And the last one then is connection.
Yeah. And I think this is a huge one. We're becoming less and less socially connected because of things like, social media. We use cars rather than, walking or getting buses. And, are we becoming less adept at social interaction because we've got screens in front of us, a lot of the time? And actually, research has shown that loneliness can be as damaging to somebody as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's pretty stark statistics. But in blue zones, what they have is strong social and familial connections. So quite often they're living in multi-generational households. So, they haven't got the lonely grandparents living on their own 200 miles away. They actually all live together and have a sense of, roles within that family setup. So they have daily connection rather than it be something that has to be scheduled. And it's just so important.
I just think it's like this sort of feeling in your own community. If you walk up to the shops, or you're just in your local community and speaking to a proper butcher, having a bit of a joke with them, and your greengrocer or whatever it might be, that feeling you get when you have that little bit of social connection, which I really love, particularly on a Saturday when you get the time to walk up the shops and connect with people. It definitely gives you a little bit of a buzz, and you can feel the difference of connection.
Yeah, and who knows what it's doing for the other person as well.
Yeah.
You might be the only person that has taken time to stop and talk to them. I just think it's so powerful and so important. Talked about the sort of family connection in blue zones. Other sort of practical tips that is suggested from the research is prioritizing close friendships rather than having tens of friends. Actually prioritizing those really close intimate friendships, and actually by doing that, having a close community of friends that you can laugh with actually increases your lifespan by 8 years.
Wow.
Which is just an incredible statistic. Other things, joining shared interest groups, eating meals with other people that we've already talked about, finding any opportunity you can to build connection with other people in your day.
I was asking a group of executives last week, I was asking each person to do a short presentation on something that they really love and they enjoy. And this guy was telling me how he'd lived in his community for about 3 to 4 years or something like that. And he recently joined a pickleball group.
Yeah.
And he said it's incredible how many people he has met locally. Never ever. He said, I would never have met these people before. I just go once a week, maybe sometimes twice a week now. And I really enjoy the sport. And he said, but the social connection. I'm not saying I'm meeting them socially, but because I've met them, I'd end up seeing them again in the local grocers or high street or whatever. And he said, I hadn't appreciated actually how isolated I'd actually been. Work, home, food, kids, bang, not actually, I think his children are grown up, so he's not in that space where he's got young kids, and then he became quite sort of isolated. So yeah, I do think that, and I know that's the same thing, I identified with that because my wife and I have done exactly the same thing. We started a pickleball group, and we've met loads of people locally and made new friends.
Yeah.
And there is a lot to be said for that. And I know it seems such an obvious thing, but when we do get busy, we get busier and busier and busier. We don't prioritize these relationships. I know in the work that I do that the happiest people I meet, aside from getting joy and happiness from their work, as we described earlier, Ikigai, they've got a very rich set of meaningful friends that either they can connect with, share the highs and the lows, but they feel wanted, they feel loved, they feel connected. And the people that are the opposite of that, when I start prodding around and finding out a little bit about them, what time do you have for friendships outside of work? They've neglected them and they become more and more isolated.
And when that work, when they reach retirement and that work is actually removed, looking around, who's there?
Whether that is that having friendships with people at work, which is fine, but you need to have some deeper, more meaningful friendships. They do make a huge difference. So we encourage you to there's another speaker last week, Neil Pasricha, who's written a lot of books around happiness. He was suggesting that calling somebody you haven't spoken to in a while, just give them a ring, or old-fashioned, pick up the telephone rather than don't send a digital message. Surprise them with a good old-fashioned telephone call.
They'll be like, why are they ringing me?
Yeah, exactly. And he said, just see what difference that makes when you reconnect with somebody. So you haven't spoken in a while, and have a chat with them and connect with them, or go and meet them, even better still.
Yeah, very powerful.
Very, very powerful. It's just so incredibly simple. And this is a highly paid speaker. And what it boils down to, and he said, look, he's done this huge, tons of research on happiness. We've read countless books, interviewed countless people. Actually, when it comes down to it, it does come down to these things that you're talking about.
I think the thing that I have loved and felt reassured by doing this research is they're very simple things, and they can easily be built in to you can build an element of all of these into your life. There is no excuse not to do that. It is a choice, isn't it? 4 things: having the right outlook and finding purpose in what you're doing, moving naturally, eating mindfully, and connecting with other people. 4 simple pillars.
And all enjoyable. And all enjoyable, absolutely. And I think for leaders, building connection and relationships and making time for those meaningful relationships at work, we end up liking people more. If you know them better, you're more forgiving of them, you're more understanding, you're more likely to get help, more likely to ask for help when you need it, they're more likely to ask you. So you have to invest in the meaningful relationship. You can't just expect it to happen. You can't delegate it. But gratitude comes from understanding what somebody has actually done. You need to get close to them. You need to understand what they're doing. But the better understanding you have of what somebody is doing, the more likely you are to show gratitude for them. The more the more likable they become to you, and vice versa. The more trust there is. The better you feel about that, the more you feel more validated, and the list goes on. You keep going on. It's a giving circle once you invest in the relationship and the connection.
100%. There was some research done, wasn't there, as well? Was it Gallup, where one of the questions is, I have a best friend at work. And that led to a more happier, engaged individual member, and then team.
Feelings of if you want higher engagement scores, then you don't want higher engagement scores. Really, what you want is the engagement. Because then you're making a difference to how people feel about themselves, and do they feel safe to speak up? Do they feel seen? Do they feel heard? Do they feel wanted? Do they feel a sense of appreciation? These are the things that whenever I ask people, what's the one thing that gives you more, makes you feel best about your workplace? Recognition and a feeling of being appreciated is way up the list. ahead of money. Money will satisfy you to a point,
Yeah.
but that need gets met fairly quickly as a hygiene factor. And what people really want, more than anything, is to feel connected and appreciated. And when I do these 360 exercises with people, over and over again, you'll see a leader and they're a little bit disappointed with their 360 results. They've got, solved problems. They're good at analytical stuff, technical stuff.
Yeah.
Driving for results, good at doing the strategic stuff. But the thing that's missing there, and the reason those things aren't necessarily appearing in the top 25th percentile, because it's just not making people feel good. And when I look at the results of people that are in that top 25%, in the mix of these 20 odd competencies, every single time without fail, there are people orientated competencies that are showing up, whether it's building relationships, developing others, building a connection with a team, inspiring people feeling they're validated for their diverse opinions. If there's a splattering of those, in addition to these more rational, left-brain type competencies, it elevates the other competencies. People want to feel wanted and want to feel connected.
It's so important, and absolutely, no matter what age you are as well, it is important.
Doesn't make any difference. It really doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make any age at all. You don't get to a certain age and you think, that's it, I'm done, I know I'm okay.
My connection. Well, that might feel like it sometimes.
Yeah, honestly, it really doesn't make a difference. So, all right, fantastic.
Great conversation. And I'm glad I've had the opportunity to chat this through, with you, because it's a topic I find fascinating and will continue, in my research, and will continue sharing.
And you do, Lisa, embody these things. I've known you a very, very, very long time, and you have been very, very consistent in this. You have always prioritized. You won't allow work to dominate to a point where you can't make these connections. You've always prioritized your family. You've always prioritized your friend group. And we know that to be true, because when we want to have a social engagement with you, we have to wait about 4 months. You've got so many engagements in the diary. So yes, you do embody these ideals, and you are one of the happiest, loveliest people I know. It's partly because that's how you live your life. It does make a difference. So
it really does. And I just, if people listening to this just have a think about these 4 pillars, we'll say them quickly again, outlook on life, moving naturally, eating mindfully, and connection, and reflect on how you can incorporate the nudges towards these things in your environment, then that is my wish for people.
Absolutely.
And obviously we'll put all of the tips into the show notes, and the books and the film and all of that sort of thing. So you can delve into this deeper.
I really encourage people to do that. Go and do their own research, read more about it, maybe make a commitment for yourself, or make a commitment with your partner, husband, wife, whatever, family. Sit down and say, can you start to build some of these rituals? Things they just become normal. It's not something you're having to do.
No.
Because then it just doesn't work. But it's something that you realise, actually, we live our life slightly differently. Eat together. We sit down and we talk to each other while we're eating. Just try and get into those and to those habits, and then just see the difference. Makes a world of difference.
100%.
Okay, thank you. And what have we got to look forward to on the next episode?
Very good question. On the next episode, I think it's with our good friend Mark Hastings, talking about human-centric leadership in a digital world. So building on an episode that we've done previously. So I'm looking forward to that.
Excellent. Okay, until then, live a happy life.
Yeah, and thanks for listening.